Where people's possessions ended, a dense, impenetrable forest was drowning in silence and semi-darkness, rising up to the heavens in a dark ridge. The gnarled oaks and dense firs overhung the ground, spreading their knotty branches out to the sides, and animal paths snaked through the grass, barely visible to the eye, leading nowhere. If a careless traveler stepped on such a path, it would lead him into the heart of the thicket, where the sun never shone. Agatha walked beside her father, holding his hand tightly. Wet sedge stalks clung to her feet, tangled in the clasps of her sandals, scratched her skin. There was no need to make noise in the forest. Otherwise, the echo will pick up your voice and take it away forever. The girl shuddered and squeezed her father's warm, calloused palm, but did not say a word. Do not be afraid. If you do not wish the forest to harm you, it will not harm you. His father stepped into a small clearing, hidden from everyone behind an impenetrable wall of trees. In the middle of it stood a massive old oak tree, its heavy branches creaking audibly. The girl sat down and stroked the bare roots protruding from the dry, dusty earth with her fingers. Yellow spruce needles and wilted leaves crunched beneath her feet as her father led Agatha to the oak. See, this used to be a mighty tree. Now it just slowly rots from the inside out, blighted by old age and disease. Without blinking, the girl looked at the black oval hollow that her father pointed out to her. "And what's inside, Daddy?" she whispered. There, the father sat his daughter in his arms. The soul of the forest is in there. Where else could it live but here? Stretching her neck, Agatha tried to see what was in the hollow, but the pitch-black darkness swallowed all sound and even light, making it impossible to see anything. "Can I go in there?" "You don't have to. You wouldn't want anyone prying into your soul, would you?" Agatha shook her head and wrapped her arms around her father's neck, who immediately stroked her daughter's tousled dark hair. "Let's go home soon, little gal. We've been walking for a long time. Mommy must be waiting for us." They walked slowly away from the clearing. The fir trees closed tightly behind them, cutting off the old oak from the rest of the forest. But until the last moment, when the dark green needles of the pine needles wove themselves into an impenetrable veil, Agatha stared at the silhouette of the tree and its black hollow. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" The woman shuddered and turned to face her daughter. Her hands, clutching the kitchen towel, fell helplessly along her body. "Daddy will never be here again." "Why not? He found another home. He betrayed us, you know? Betrayed us." There was a growl in her mother's voice. Agatha stepped back fearfully. "But what about us? He won't just leave us, will he? He doesn't need us anymore, Agatha. We're on our own now." Agatha shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't want to believe it, didn't even want to think that her loving, kind father could just leave them. Wiping away the salty drops that ran down her cheeks, the girl ran out into the yard of the house, pushed open the creaky gate and rushed down the beaten path toward the woods. How long she ran, she did not know. Her eyes were filled with resentment, and a low whimper escaped from her chest. Her feet led her to a small clearing where an old oak tree stood, cut off from the rest of the world. Not so long ago, she had often walked here with her father, who had told her wonderful things about the forest and its inhabitants, and promised Agatha that he would teach her how to recognize the medicinal herbs. But now her father had gone to a strange house, to a strange family. And the girl had no choice but to sit on the gnarled roots and weep bitterly. The mother waited a long time for her daughter to get tired of crying and return to the house. But it was past lunchtime, and the wicket gate did not creak again, nor were Agatha's footsteps heard on the path leading to the door. Worried, the woman went into the woods. She wandered along the familiar path, her feet crushing the overgrown grass, occasionally calling her daughter's name, but her cries went unanswered. The trees were leaning toward her, obscuring the sun with their overgrown branches. There was neither singing of birds nor buzzing of midges, as if a cast-iron weight of silence had descended on the forest. At one moment, the mother pulled apart the thorny spruce branches with her hands, and suddenly she saw her unwise little daughter. In front of the tall oak stood Agatha, stretching out her neck and peering into the blackness of the hollow. She did not move, did not even seem to breathe, but gazed steadily inside the tree. "Agatha, there you are." Grabbing the girl by the elbow, her mother gave her a good shake to bring her to her senses. "Why did you run into the woods, huh? My father and I used to come here often. He said that the soul of the forest lives in this tree." Agatha gave her mother a blank and lifeless look. "What soul?" The woman shrieked. "Forests and trees don't have souls. They're not human beings. I knew your father had made you crazy with his talk. He was a foolish dreamer, and he still is." Agatha felt bad for her father, but she didn't dare to say anything to her mother. "There's no soul in there. It's just a hollow tree. Here, look." When she got close to the tree, her mother stretched out her hand, intending to stick it into the blackness of the hole. But suddenly her daughter's frighteningly cold voice sounded behind her. "Don't do that." Agatha frowned, trying to burn a hole in her mother with her gaze, though her eyes were still wet. "Why else?" the woman asked with a slight uncertainty in her voice. "Whoever lives there won't like it." There was something eerie in those words, and her mother, feeling goosebumps run down her spine, pulled her hand away from the hollow tree. Not that she believed her daughter's tales, but all her instincts screamed of some unseen danger. Backing away from the tree, the woman grabbed Agatha's arm roughly, stepping back to the edge of the clearing. The girl reluctantly followed, stumbling over roots and tangling her feet in the grass. "Don't you dare go into the forest alone again. You have nothing to do here. You'll get lost and end up in some swamp. And don't stand in front of that dry bark." Nodding obediently, Agatha swallowed her tears and thought about how much she would like to see her father again, to hug him tightly, as she always did, and kiss him on the cheek. There was no way he would ever raise his voice at her over a short walk in the woods. One day during summer vacation, her mother woke Agatha with a light pat on the cheek. The woman had a charming straw hat on her head and an empty basket hanging from the bend of her elbow. "You keep sleeping and sleeping. We wanted to go mushroom picking this morning." "Oh, I completely forgot." Jumping to her feet, the girl ran around the room, getting ready. "Don't forget to brush your teeth," reminded her mother. A quarter of an hour later, they both stepped onto the path leading into the forest. The old gate creaked behind them, slamming shut. As soon as mother and daughter passed through the undergrowth and into the thicket, the sun disappeared behind the treetops, and there was a shaky twilight. They had not been walking long when suddenly a cuckoo cuckooed somewhere above their heads. "Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo." The bird's voice made my mother shudder, but almost immediately she laughed. "I haven't seen cuckoos in this forest for a long time. Well, let's ask her. Cuckoo, cuckoo, tell me how long I have left to live." The mother's cry rang through the forest, soared to the tops of the trees, and the echo drove it away. After a few languid seconds, the cuckoo cuckooed clearly and sharply, "Cuckoo!" and it fell silent. Mother frowned. "She gave me a little too much time." "Well, what's the use of worrying? Could be a decade or even a century." The woman glanced at Agatha, who was quiet, and asked, "Don't you want to ask her about yourself? Daddy always said you can't ask a cuckoo about the years of your life if you're afraid of the answer. And I don't want to know." The mention of her father made the woman press her lips together and turn away irritably. She went on her way, forgetting both the cuckoo and her daughter's words. They had been walking for an hour. Her mother was humming an unobtrusive tune, and Agatha was running around, looking under every bush, searching for mushrooms in the roots of the trees. Her bowls were slowly filling up, and the girl, absorbed in the excitement of quiet hunting, did not notice how she was getting farther and farther away from her mother. She moved from one clearing to another, enthusiastically looking for round caps of mushrooms. Here and there she saw cheeseberries, whites and buntings, and obediently ran from one mushroom to another, completely forgetting that she should not go far from her mother. And when at last she looked up, she realized to her horror that she was lost. "Mommy," Agatha called softly, but no one answered, and the gloomy forest instantly swallowed up all sound, sealing it in a clammy shroud of silence. After a few minutes of standing still and trying to hear any footsteps, the girl could only hear the sound of wind in the crowns, the flapping of someone's wings high in the sky, and the creaking of an old tree. Agatha stepped toward the sound. After a few meters, she found herself in a clearing where a rotten oak tree stood. She had forgotten all about it. Ever since her mother had forbidden her to go into the woods alone, Agatha had never come to this place again. But it was only now that she realized how much she had actually wanted to come back here. This clearing seemed to be imbued with tranquility. Dropping her basket by the roots, the girl walked up to the rough trunk of the oak tree. Just above the level of her eyes was the gaping chasm of a hollow in which, as before, nothing could be seen. But Agatha froze in place, mesmerized by it, just as before. She was gazing into someone else's soul, allowing someone or something to gaze into her own in return. It was not long before the mother noticed that her daughter was not there. She called agitatedly for Agatha, darting between the trees with involuntary tears in her eyes. The basket of mushrooms remained somewhere far behind her back, and the woman kept breaking through the bushes and brushwood, searching for trails or traces of Agatha. But there was nothing, as if the girl had vanished into thin air in an instant. For hours her mother wandered in despair through the thicket, biting her lip and occasionally raising her voice, hoping to hear an answer. And at one point a muffled voice came to her ears. "He and I have been here many times," moving toward these quiet sounds as if they were a saving light. Her mother came within a minute to an impenetrable barrier of spruce branches. The dense trees did not immediately allow her to make her way further. The needles dug into her skin, tore her clothes, and even when pulled aside, they immediately tried to strike her back or side. "He taught me not to disturb the woods for nothing." At last her mother's eyes saw a small hidden clearing where Agatha stood by an old oak tree, talking to herself. "Father never lied to me." The girl, her head raised, did not move and only gazed into the blackness of the hollow, as if it was there sat her invisible interlocutor, with whom she so carelessly shared her thoughts. "Agatha!" the mother called in a muffled voice. The daughter did not even flinch or turn, as if she had not heard. It was just as it had been that time. "Agatha, what are you doing here? Who are you talking to?" The mother rushed toward the girl, but before she could get a few steps away, she suddenly stood still. Agatha did not react to her, but continued to say something under her nose without blinking. "What's the matter with you?" With an inner shudder, the mother touched her daughter's shoulder and turned her around. On the whitened face glistened two bottomless wells of eyes, in which there was neither fear nor joy. It was as if the girl was in a trance, and only after her mother shook her a couple of times did Agatha blink and stare at the woman with a normal look. "Why did you run away from me?" I didn't run away. I just got lost and was looking for you." Her daughter tried to justify herself. "You weren't looking. You were standing there, in that damned clearing, talking to the tree like a fool." The mother was furious, her fingers digging painfully into Agatha's shoulders. "I am not a fool," said the girl, almost crying. "I was talking to the soul of the forest. She lives in that tree. You and your nonsense again. It's not nonsense at all." I saw her eyes twinkling in the hollow. They were as green as malachite. Her mother was stunned for a moment, but she pulled herself together. "It was your bad father who told you some stories back then, wasn't it? And you believed his words, and now you see something in every tree." The woman was getting more and more turned on with every word, as she always did when it came to her ex-husband. "You still haven't forgotten about your lousy father. You ran away from me here, to this memorable place of yours, and then you remembered how good it was for you. I heard you. You talked about him." Agatha stared in horror at her mother's angry face. She was shaking her daughter so violently that her head was shaking like a doll's. "I tried to prove to you that we could be happy together. Without that cheater. I tried so hard. I wanted to be the perfect mother for you. I tried so hard. And all this time you've been thinking about your father, just hoping to run away to the woods to come here. Answer me, you little louse." Suddenly, the woman whipped her palm on the cheek of the frightened girl, who did not understand why her sweet mother was so angry. The pain scorched her skin and tears spurted from her eyes. "And no, Mommy, please don't hit me." As if ashamed for a moment, the woman let go of Agatha. But she still looked at her with a hatred that she had never seen in her mother before. "I knew you'd be like him when you grew up. The same rotund, silly dreamer who lives in some imaginary world of her own. Ungrateful bitch." Turning around, the woman strode away from the clearing. She whimpered with resentment and pressed her palm against her flushed cheek. From that day on, things in their small family had only gotten worse. The whole house was saturated with the poison of mutual resentment, regret, and anger. Her mother strictly forbade Agatha to go into the woods, much less to the tree. Now there were no trips for mushrooms and berries, no joint walks. The dark hulk of the forest was now a closed territory, and the girl could only gaze longingly into the thicket of trees beyond the outskirts, standing near the locked gate. But her mother could not bear the bitterness that settled in her breast. The very thought that her daughter still thought of her departed father, remembered only good things about him, and really in many ways became like him, tormented the woman days and nights. And more often in the guise of her favorite child, mother saw the features of her hated her man, who betrayed her. At first she worked a lot, completely given up on her daughter, disappeared outside the house all day long. But then, despairing and bringing herself to nervous exhaustion, for the first time found solace in wine. Agatha was at first glad to see the change in her mother's character. Now, after drinking one glass in the evening, the woman was in good spirits, laughing and joking, even kissing her daughter more often. But after a month, my mother began to drink not only in the evenings, and now it was not limited to a glass of wine. At first it was 1 bottle a day, then 2, then the woman switched to vodka, and soon Agatha was horrified to find that she no longer recognized her mother. She started drinking from the moment she woke up, skipping work, smashing furniture in fits of rage, snapping at her daughter over nothing. The house turned into a dirty, smelly doghouse, and her mother blamed Agatha for everything. Vodka made the woman aggressive, and she was no longer shy about slapping her daughter, throwing bottles at her. "He was an idiot, and you're no better. You stupid chicken. Bring your mother a glass." Every day Agatha heard those words. She was bitter that her mother hated her so much. She couldn't even understand why she deserved to be treated like that. And more often Agatha began to sneak out of the hated house when her mother was drunk to the point of insanity, and, despite all the prohibitions, to run away into the woods. Her old oak tree, her cozy glade, they were always ready to listen to any complaints. The branches creaked, the brittle twigs crunched underfoot, the wind played playfully with her hair, and Agatha forgot everything about the world. Here she felt that she was among friends. And she talked and talked and talked. She spent hours telling the Black Hollow how good her father had been, and how happy her mother had been when the family hadn't fallen apart. She shared her grievances and her hopes, and the oak tree listened to her words. Sometimes in the darkness Agatha saw someone's bright green eyes that twinkled like gems. They never blinked and disappeared as quickly as they appeared. At first her mother did not notice her daughter's disappearance, only occasionally asking her where she went. And Agatha made up something each time, even though she could see her mother didn't care. She didn't ask the question to really find out what her daughter was doing, but just to ask, to show that she could still see what was going on around her. "Where have you been?" Agatha's mother asked her habitually one day, as soon as the girl crossed the threshold. The unkempt woman sitting in the chair did not look like the mother Agatha had once known and loved. Unkempt and dirty, she was clutching a bottle in one hand, slumped in the chair in front of the television, and holding scraps of a tattered photograph in the other. "I went to the store," Agatha said quietly. "You're lying. Here, I bought some gum." The girl took the wrapper out of her pocket and showed it to her mother. "I know where you've been. I know where you always run when you think I've fallen asleep. Into your own damn woods." Agatha remained silent. She stood with her lips pressed together, her gaze lowered, and wished this would just end so she could go to her room sooner. "Don't you understand? Your father was a bastard. He left us for some young nymph, and you still think he loved you. You keep going to those trees like you hope your father will go back there. Daddy was good. He loved you, and he loved me too. Stupid chicken. He didn't care about us." Her mother shrieked, throwing at Agatha the scraps of a photograph on which she could see her father's smiling face. "Did he come here to our house to see you, his daughter, even once? Has he called you even once since that day to see how you're doing? No. And no old oak tree with a hollow will change that. You can live there, reminiscing about your walks in the woods with your father, but nothing will change. He won't come back. He won't love you. He won't even think about you." "It's not true," Agatha whimpered. "Daddy loved me. He never said anything bad to me, and he didn't lie to me." "You naive little girl." Rising to her feet, her mother left the empty bottle in the chair and glared at her daughter. "He lied to both of us. From the very beginning. He didn't need us at all. And you should forget about him too. Do what he did to both of us. Blot him out of your memory. I'll help you." Her mother sprang out of the house with sudden agility and ran toward the wooden shed that stood in the corner of the lot. A minute later, armed with a massive axe, she swung open the creaking gate and ran toward the woods. "Mom, where are you going?" "Wait." In the setting sun, which colored the tops of the fir trees reddish red, Agatha saw the woman stagger away, dragging the heavy axe behind her, lost between the bushes and trees. Her daughter rushed after her and tried to bring her mother back home, but she only threw her girl aside with a growl and walked confidently toward the clearing where Agatha had spent so many hours alone with herself, her thoughts, and the silent listener with green eyes. The axe plunged into the dry wood with a thud, splinters and chips flew sideways, and the wood groaned. Agatha watched in horror as her mother swung the axe deeper and deeper into the rotten wood, and she heard the branches of the oak creaking for help. "Mom, stop it, please. You don't have to do this," the girl begged. "I'll teach you a lesson. You will forget your father. Stop running here, and you will always be by my side." The sweating woman clenched her teeth and continued her work. The blade of the axe glistened in the setting sun, and with each new blow Agatha felt something important in her own soul being cut away. She rushed to her mother and dug her fingers into her hands, trying to stop the madness. "Get out of the way." The woman roughly pushed the girl away and continued killing the old tree. After a quarter of an hour, the oak tree began to topple sideways with a shrill creak. Its rotten black gut was an easy target for the axe, and as it collapsed to the ground, a cloud of dust, leaves, and dust flew into the air. Agatha did not look at it. She sat back, shrunken into a lump, and only cried. Her childhood had been ruthlessly cut down to the root. Her mother walked silently past her, satisfied with her deed, and lost herself in the forest. Night came soon, covering the land and the houses with its blue-black wing. The light was still on in Agatha's room for a while, as she lay awake on the bed, but as soon as her mother noticed the light beaming from under the door, she came in unceremoniously and flicked the switch. "There's no need to get snotty. Go to bed." With a final slam of the door, the woman went into the living room to watch TV. Agatha lay there unmoving, She listened to all the sounds in and out of the house. The television playing, the faucet dripping in the kitchen, the car starting up with a growl somewhere in the neighborhood. The branches of the shrubbery banging on the window comforted her with their crackling sound, and soon she drifted off to sleep, hoping to find solace in it. In the middle of the night, Agatha was awakened by the loud, sharp slam of the front door. She jumped up on the bed, and it took her a long time to realize whether she had imagined it or not. Deciding to go to the kitchen for water, the girl got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. The TV was still on in the living room. Some action movie was playing on the screen, and there were sounds of shooting and explosions. The girl thought that probably they were the ones that woke her up. Her mother was not in the chair, and Agatha turned off the TV, then drank some water and headed back to her room. As she passed her mother's room, she peeked through the open door and immediately froze in surprise. The bed was empty, the house breathed silence, and Agatha wandered around the rooms for a few minutes, trying to figure out where her mother had gone. Only the woman was nowhere to be found, as if she had vanished in an instant. Not at once Agatha heard a strange sound from the street, to which she had been ignoring all this time, but now she was suddenly concentrating on it. It was the creaking of the old gate in the yard of their house. The wicket that was always locked at night. Stepping outside, Agatha walked over to the fence to confirm her hunch. The door was open and creaked obnoxiously with every breeze. Had her mother gone alone into the woods at night? Agatha couldn't make sense of it. Taking a flashlight from the kitchen and putting on a jacket, the girl moved toward the forest, which had become unusually frightening with the arrival of night. But she was not afraid of the thorny branches, or the cries of vague birds, or the bumps under her feet, which in the darkness seemed bottomless potholes. Agatha knew the forest. She knew it would not harm her, and she walked along the narrow path without fear, milling about in the grass and lighting her way with her lantern. The path led her to a clearing. All the paths in the forest led Agatha there sooner or later, except that there was no longer a felled tree on the ground. The old oak was still standing in its usual place, as if it had never been touched. There was no trace of the axe's blows on the dried trunk, not a seam, not a single nick, and Agatha, amazed to the core of her soul, came to the very foot of her old friend. Not believing her eyes, she gazed into the bark of the oak, even stroked it with her fingers. Not immediately the girl looked at the hollow, but after shining her flashlight there, she suddenly saw a detail that had never been there before. Out of the impenetrable blackness of the hollow looked out a dead pale hand. The woman's slender fingers were open, and on one of them gleamed the rim of a gold ring. The ring Agatha's mother had always worn. Cautiously, the girl reached out and lightly touched the hand, whose extension was lost in the darkness of the hollow. The skin was scalding cold, as if it were ice rather than flesh. And at the same instant Agatha touched her mother's hand. An unknown force pulled the lifeless limb into the gut of the old tree. The blackness greedily swallowed the brush. Her mother had taken the life of the tree. The forest had taken her life in return. Agatha gazed long into the familiar darkness of the hollow, not afraid of it at all. She knew that the soul of the thicket would not harm her, because her father had taught her so, and she had always trusted her father, despite everything her mother had said. The silence of the night was no longer interrupted by the sound of the wind, or the hooting of an owl, or the rustling of grass and leaves. Dropping the lantern and grabbing the edges of the hollow with her hands, Agatha pulled herself up, helping herself with her feet. Her sandals slipped on the bark, but she reached up anyway, clinging to the bumps with her fingers. Finally, she found herself in the belly of the tree. In a small clearing, hidden behind a thicket of thorny spruces in the depths of the forest, stood an old rotten tree with an oval hollow. A little girl was climbing the trunk of the tree, scraping her hands and knees against the hard bark. As soon as she reached the hollow and climbed into it, she was swallowed up by the coal blackness. There was no longer visible neither feet in sandals, nor jacket, nor dark hair. So the girl Agatha dissolved into the soul of the forest. Only a moment later, a white-breasted cuckoo with bright, as if burning coals, green eyes burst out of the hollow and, spreading its wings, flew into the sky. A small black jackdaw, still inept at controlling its wings, flew up from the trunk of a rotting oak tree and, opening its beak, also soared upward in a hurry.